Everybody. Welcome to the Fireside Chat, and thank you so much, Tara, for taking out the time to speak today. It means the world to us.
Thank you. Thank you
So,
for inviting me.
it's Women's Month at Startup Grind, so that's why we have Tara with us. So, she's the founder of Bound. It's a company which helps people and brands grow through stories. Her podcast, Books and Beyond with Bound, is in the top 1.5% of all global podcasts. She has previously worked at Penguin India, She the People TV, Bloomberg Quint, and her writing has appeared in CondeNast Traveller, Scroll, and more. She's an alumna of Columbia University and she lives in Mumbai. And today she is here with us to talk about her journey as a woman entrepreneur. So, Tara, what caught your interest first, books or business?
Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me here, and thank you for the very lovely introduction. What caught my interest first? Well, I think ever since I was a kid, I've always sort of been fascinated by stories. Um, I started reading very early on, and it was a house which was always full of books. Both my parents are readers. So I was always sort of I had a love for books, and then that translated to a love for writing as well. So I would say that that is the thing that caught my idea first. Before, when you're a kid, you have no idea what business means, but books are something that you're exposed to at a very young age. I've grown up in a business family, so sort of, our dinner time conversations, etc., were catered around that, and therefore I was at a very interesting confluence of creativity and having the influence of my family that has led me to sort of venture into this path.
That's awesome. I mean, growing up with books is one of the, I don't think we see it as a privilege, but it is
It
indeed one.
is. It
And
definitely is.
yeah, and it's one of the best things that could happen to us. Like, I'm a reader myself, so I
Yeah.
completely get the interest.
Yeah.
So, what is the best part about being in the creative writing and publishing industry?
Best part.
Yeah.
Very good question. Okay, the best part is, I guess, sort of like it's something that is driven by a lot of passion. So people who work in this industry, obviously, they're here because they are passionate. It's might be a little harder to make money, especially starting out. If you're copywriter or you're working as an editor at a publishing house, your starting salaries might not be as high as in other fields. But it depends on sort of like what you do with the skills you have, and in order to sort of make a good amount for yourself. But what is the best part is that it's driven by a lot of passion, and the people who work in the industry, they genuinely have a love for storytelling. And the other thing is that you're working with, so if you're sort of helping people put their stories out into the world, then you're working with very interesting minds out there
Yeah.
who, they're very fertile minds, very imaginative people, and you are in contact with those people. So the kind of people that you meet and the kind of friendships and the relationships you build is very, very interesting.
Absolutely. Um, I mean, I totally resonate with the idea that you get to meet such people, and yeah, makes complete sense. That would be the best part, the people in the industry.
Yeah.
So, since you've done your publishing course from Columbia, so what is different about the Indian publishing industry as compared to worldwide publishing industries?
The Indian publishing industry is interesting. It's a lot smaller. So, for
Mhm.
example, in New York, if you're an editor, there's many more editors, there's many more departments, there's many more books that are coming out. And the print run of all of these books is also a lot higher because it's an English speaking population. So it's a much bigger scale that it's operating in,
Yeah.
and so that each book also has, it has more bandwidth and it has more sort of opportunity to sell more copies internationally. So that is the difference, and obviously the publishing industry in India is very vibrant, but it is much smaller in scale, which is also very interesting. It makes it harder for debut writers to get published because there's only a certain amount of books that are published. But what is attractive about India is that the number of amazing stories that are coming out of India right now. We all have buzzwords like the creator economy. Everybody is a creator. We have OTT platforms that are booming. So the kind of scope that there is for Indian storytelling and taking Indian stories to the world is amazing. I mean, just right now we all know Cannes Film Festival happened, and India was sort of the country in the spotlight,
Yeah.
because I feel like the publishing industry is interesting in that regard because a lot of talent comes through that industry. Whether it is sort of books being made into movies, or the writers of books then going on into other avenues, writing for screen, creating other kind of content. Because the amount of time and effort that it takes to write one book, the amount of skill that it takes to write one book, the amount of research is considerable. So I feel like the best minds are the ones that can sort of that are the best minds are the ones that are writing these books, then
Mhm.
going on taking
Absolutely.
those stories and doing other things.
Yeah. So, drawing on that, now, we'd like to know, how did Bound come into existence? Like, because it's kind of a startup which is, not very common. Like, you hear a lot about tech startups these days, but Bound is something that is very unique. So, how did it come into existence?
Yeah, so again, we are seeing a lot of scope for creativity in India, and there's a never-ending demand for storytelling. Especially with these international players coming in to India, it's just opened up the entire market. And also the other thing is that every company, so we work with a lot of companies also, and every company is now a content company. Every company, sort of, even a B2B company is now a content company, because simple things like employer branding, attaining talent, all of those things. Where are you going to communicate with sort of your target market, your customers, your employees, etc.? So it's so important to utilize all of these platforms that are out there. So every company is a creator, is in the creator economy, and every company is a media company. So that's sort of why we started Bound, to cater to this explosion of creativity and the need for stories in India. So the idea was to really provide an infrastructure and would we help take these stories out into the world, either by upskilling, which is through our classes, through our production and editorial services, or through, uh, is my internet, sorry, is it fine, my internet?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely fine.
Yeah. So through production, editorial services or classes, or by creating content by ourselves that other people can partner with. So that was really the vision of Bound, to cater to uh, this demand for content.
Okay, yeah. What you said about every company being a creator these days, that is something I think we can see a huge boom on Instagram, and especially out of all the social medias, and even on other places, like like, that is the only way you can sell yourself, with content. So you guys are doing, I think, the most important jobs which a business needs today. So what were the major challenges that you faced while you were building Bound?
So a lot of challenges, like starting something from scratch is never easy, of course.
Absolutely.
You have to sort of go through many iterations, you have to understand what works. As an entrepreneur, when you're bootstrapping a venture, you learn a lot by trial and error.
Yeah.
So you may not know you, because the learning curve is always vertical, right? So I may not know, for example, like I may not know everything about PR, but I still need to sort of uh, you know get the word out about Bound, right? I have to build relationships with journalists and figure out that part of the game, even though I'm not an expert. So a lot of it is I need to hire somebody, right? I need to hire my first employee. I know nothing about HR. I know nothing about interviewing somebody. I know nothing about setting up the processes. So it's a lot of upskilling in different kinds of verticals. For example, like I have to sell a class, we do class, I have to sell a class. Now I know nothing about digital marketing, running ads, creating campaigns, reaching the customer. So you learn that. So that the toughest but also the best part about being an entrepreneur is that there is a vertical learning curve at all stages. You cross one level, you hire your first employee, suddenly you need a team of five, or suddenly you need a team of 10. So you're always faced with challenges that you've not faced before, and it's always sort of a vertical learning curve. So that would be the hardest part of being an entrepreneur, and also the easiest, I mean the nicest part of it. And then there is rejection. I think rejection is something that every person faces in their life. And the more I read somewhere that if you're not getting rejected at least 4 or 5 times a week, you are not doing a good job. And that so I have this was when I just started Bound, and we were pitching for something and we were getting rejected, and I googled rejection. This was sort of when I just started, and a Harvard Business Review article came up that spoke about rejection and said if you're not getting rejected, you're doing something wrong. And it just changed everything for me, because it means that you're putting yourself out there and you're trying. If you're not rejected and nothing, there's no movement, then nothing is happening. So I think rejection is a hard part of it, but um, also a necessary part of it. So that is also something that you have to get over, because a lot of times you kind of can take rejection to heart. So that's a hard part also. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, rejection kind of worked as redirection for you guys, I could say.
Yeah.
And so, like you mentioned already, the most rewarding part is, the vertical learning curve. So, just if you could give us a rundown of, how your day-to-day routine looks like at work.
That's a very hard question. The day-to-day routine is always changing.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult question. But in a typical day-to-day routine, see, we do a lot of work with clients because we have editorial services and we have podcast production services. So we do a lot of client work. So we do a lot of sales calls. We do a lot of sort of speaking with clients to understand what they need. So right now. I'm more sort of doing that side than existing clients who sort of have projects going on, checking with them to see what is the process, what is the at which stage is the project, is it going on track. So my day to day job is more managing, which means that I'm seeing the projects that we currently have, where are they going on track, are they going according to the timelines, if they're not going according to the timelines, what is the problem, what help can I give, sort of what additional resources do we need, and then obviously for pitching work, uh, sort of like how can we improve ourselves, and then setting up systems as well, so right from the smallest thing like a social media post, when is that post going to go up, what is the strategy. So my day-to-day work involves a lot of strategy, and it involves a lot of management, making sure that our projects and our processes are going smoothly. And also um, I hate doing last minute work, so it's a pretty well, like I spend a lot of time also organizing. So I have a very detailed calendar. We know exactly what is happening, sort of 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously things come in and you have to shift things around, but in a general sense, everybody is sort of knows what they're working on sort of for the next 2 to 3 weeks is pretty much set. Because I always tell people this, I've never pulled an all-nighter because I just don't want the stress. So we plan everything sort of in a way where there's enough time to also buffer for things going wrong. So that's sort of It sounds a little boring, but that is sort of my everyday
Yeah,
what I
no, really. It's more than boring. I think it's because you're so well planned. That's why you might think that it comes across as boring, but I think that's quite commendable that you're so organized, especially in a creative field. Since you're working, I think, with a lot of writers. So I think you must face a lot of, a lot of your clients going through maybe a creative slump and, not being able to meet deadlines. So, like, is how do you kind of get
no, that's a
somebody out of that creative
That's
slump?
a very good question. So, a lot of people think, oh, creativity is something that sort of like is like airy fairy. But actually, sort of, if you even listen to the best writers speak, they'll say they consistently write 500 words a day. So yeah, there are certain times, like as creative people, where you're 100% more inspired, and sometimes when you're just not at all inspired, right? But what we do is sort of, say a client is making a podcast with us, right? We map out the creative process step by step. So it's not sort of that, like, you just jump in and you don't know what you're doing. We sort of demystify the creative process and create sort of tiny, tiny, tiny goals that you can achieve, that will then help you reach your sort of reach your goal. So for example, even like at a brainstorming level, right? We have a workshop just for brainstorming, where we broken down the process to get sort of everyone on that same page, because creativity is something that can be taught, and creativity is something that you can tap into at any time. It's sort of how you create the system around it, that you and how you can bring out your creativity. So you don't have to wait for like inspiration to strike you. You can be your own inspiration.
I think that's the first time I've heard that, creativity can be taught, because I always feel like, there are times when people, or even for my talking about myself, like, okay, this time of the day I feel at my best or at my most creative, and then after a few days I'm like, I'm stuck. So
Yeah.
this is a first that I've heard, and I think that's something which should be cultivated at a larger scale. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
what
there are
needs to get
certain
out of
amazing,
this?
yeah, books about this also, which I can sort of recommend later on, about demystifying the creative process and
Yeah,
how you
for
can be
sure. I
creative.
think
Play your
everybody would love those
Yeah,
recommendations.
yeah,
Yeah,
sure. I can sort of send them across as well. Yeah.
yeah. So we have a question in the chat from Sonakshi. So, how do you manage balance between personal and professional life? Is there often a compromise somewhere?
Okay, balance personal professional life. Uh, yeah, I think sort of like everybody else. Um, I don't know how to answer this question, sort of, because uh, you naturally separate your work life. For me, it's always sort of, I've never really let my work life affect my personal life. So something might be sort of, obviously it does seep in, uh, but at the end of the day, you really need some. I really believe in work life balance, because we're in a creative industry. We need to be fresh. As an entrepreneur, you need to keep getting that same energy level, day on day on day, right? You need to um, come at it with the same energy level, and that's impossible to do if you don't switch off. So at the end of the work day, I sort of make sure that I close my computer. I work out every day, and that immediately takes your mind off of work. I make sure, even though I may have a problem at work or things like that, I make sure, like, I have my time for relaxation, because that allows your mind to sort of reset, and you make sure you get enough sleep. It allows your mind to reset and de-stress as well a little bit, because worrying and thinking and overworking and thinking about the same problem over and over again doesn't really, sometimes you just need to meditate on it, you just need to sleep on it, let it go, and the answer will come to you. So I think that's like how everyone else sort of manages their personal and professional life, is important. I feel like, oh yeah, so maybe like I keep a very strict calendar. So Like, so even if I have to work on the weekend, it's again, what I said earlier, it's a lot of it is pre-planned. I keep buffer time, so it ends up sort of not sort of eating in too much. If you do have to work a little extra, some days you work a little extra if you have to put in some time on the weekend, but just doing it in a way that's sort of a little organized, and uh, you're not overworking is very important. So again, I go back to the thing, you should not be pulling all nighters. Like, I don't believe in that. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That sounds great. I mean, having a professional personal life sorted, that is kind of a necessity today. Like, you cannot function if they are not separate.
Right,
So
exactly.
I hope that answers your question, Sonakshi. So then, Tara, to what would you, attribute your success?
Success. I don't think of it as success or failure. Like, the same thing what I said about rejection. You
Mhm.
know, it's sort of, I don't think of it sort of like, so I'm doing it out of passion, but it's sort of like, if there's a demand for it, and we're catering to that demand, and we're actually adding value to somebody or a service that someone needs, and as long as we keep doing that, that's great. That's about it, sort of, and we're adding value, and we're making a difference, and we're actually sort of helping someone with a problem they have.
Yeah.
I think if you're doing that, that's great.
Mhm.
And you're doing it in a stress free manner. uh, that's great. I don't think of it as sort of in that way. And also the other thing is, if you are constantly, for me, if I get sort of very restless. I think possibly like all entrepreneurs and creative people get restless if they feel that they're not learning, or they're
Yeah.
like just in their comfort zone. So I can sort of easily be in my comfort zone and not sort of, try to grow, try to expand. But if that is the minute I feel like I'm in a plateau, is when sort of I get a little uncomfortable. So I think for me, like, success or a joy of it is that vertical learning curve. And always, it's sort of when you look back and you think, oh my god, when I first started, I thought i could never I could never do this. I could never make a podcast, right? I had no idea, zero clue what to do, zero clue how to produce it, zero clue how to edit it, zero clue how to reach out to my first guest, you know. And then when you think back, you're like, oh my god, at one point I had zero clue. Now I can produce sort of them, I'm producing them for other people, and it's the same thing. Right now I have challenges, and I think there's no way I'm going to do this. The best part of it is looking back and saying, oh, I did it, and now there's a next mountain to climb. So I think that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, so tiny steps make up that success. It's not,
Yeah.
one huge goal, it's just tiny goals.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, since you have, quite, I think, a decade of experience in writing and publishing industry by now, so what do you think is the biggest roadblock for women, especially
Hmm.
in the industry?
See, like, I feel like luckily the publishing industry, there's, there I've always had women bosses, and there's a lot of women in this industry, which makes the workplace very good. The workplaces are, because they're run by women, so it's sort of, I've never faced any sort of sexism, etc. I think it's more like a systemic thing, in which case, sort of like, maybe like in terms of like talent pool or dropping off, drop off rate for women. But in this industry, it's pretty good, actually, I would say, in terms of the amount of women that are in this industry. Even if you see sort of like on news channels and things like that, there are more and more women coming. And I actually have an all women team right now. And so every time I call for a job application, I'm getting sort of, the supply chain is sort of like educated women is, at least I know we're living in privileged circles, but it is sort of increasing. I actually worked at a women's media company, She the People, as a journalist. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that in that company we were sort of shining the light on women in the workplace,
Mhm. Yeah.
um, and yeah, I think sort of publishing is a good place. I have nothing really to say about the roadblock where
Mhm.
it's a good field to be in for women. Yeah.
That is great to hear, actually. Like, you cannot possibly say that about a lot of fields today,
Yeah.
which is quite upsetting.
Yes.
But it's great to hear that, the writing and the publishing industry is great for women. It's a good
I
place
mean,
to
I
be.
wouldn't say great for women, or like I'm not going to sort of like paint it as like better
Yeah.
than it is, or there are obviously problems, but comparatively, if you look at even the top bosses, in a
Mhm.
Penguin or a HarperCollins, etc.,
Yeah.
like a Chikki Sarkar, who's like the publisher of Juggernaut, there's a lot more sort of women in this industry, which is
Mhm.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, we have a question from Ala. What are the challenges you face while hiring right now? There's a huge gap in the talent expected and the
Right.
talent required.
Yeah, this is a huge problem. Um, Very interesting actually. In terms of even the retention of talent or finding good talent. Um, so we never have a problem hiring for sort of creative people. So if you're hiring an editor or a writer, because we have a very large community on Instagram, large community of people who know about us. Luckily for us, we when we do put out a call for any of these creative people, our reach is pretty high. So we get a lot of good applications in, and we usually manage to get someone in. In fact, we put out these jobs post every week, and in fact, we've also started helping other companies hire for their creative talent, because they don't have the kind of reach that we do. So we are doing that. But in terms of other kind of talent, it is hard. For example, we business development, sales, etc. We don't have that kind of reach, and finding talent in that area can get a little hard, um, because also sort of you know nowadays I think what's happening is there's a lot of sort of funding that is sort of going into the startup world, that is inflating salaries as well for people. So for a sort of like younger entrepreneur just starting out, to match those levels of salary is difficult. However, that being said, when there is a sort of funds are drying up a bit, so I don't know how that's going to work in general. Also the gig economy, so
Yeah.
what we cannot hire full time, we sort of retain over freelancers, and we're finding a lot of quality talent actually is in the freelancing economy, which is also more cost effective for us, because we then hire on a project to project basis whenever we need somebody. However, the challenge with going with a going with a freelancer kind of model is there's a lot more management needed, because that person is not full time. So which means you need to sort of manage their time also. When are they available? Okay, they are not available for this project, call up another freelancer.
Mhm.
So those are the pitfalls of the gig economy, though it is more cost effective, and there is some amazing talent that resides there.
Okay. Yeah. Makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question, Ala. So, drawing on that line, so how do you see the next few years for the Indian writing and publishing industry unfolding?
Yeah. So see, like that's a very interesting question. Um, in the West, sort of traditional book publishing, it's a little difficult right now. It's an industry that's going through a lot of flux. I personally believe that books are a format that's going to be around 100, 200 years from now. The only difference is sort of how much a book sells. So how much a book sells now versus how much a book sell 100 years ago is different. Why? Because we have OTT, we have audio, we have podcasts, we have Instagram, we are bombarded with different kinds of content. So what is happening right now, I think, is there's a lot of push off for non-fiction content. So if you're a fiction author, it's a little difficult to get published in a mainstream publisher like a Penguin or a HarperCollins, etc., because they're businesses and they want to go for sales. So most of their list, 75% of these publishers' lists, they are non-fiction. And why is it non-fiction? It's because, say, I'm publishing a diet book, right? Now, a book about like eating well or whatever, right? I'm not only reaching readers, I'm reaching people who want to know about that subject. So I'm selling more books. So non-fiction is very interesting. If you're a non-fiction writer, that is amazing. You can definitely sort of like find a niche and get published in the publishing industry. For fiction, it is a little harder. However, there is a I speak to a lot of screenwriters, a lot of sort of writers are writing for OTT platforms. Now, that is a huge sort of opportunity where writers can plug in because there's a lot of demand for stories, and it's sort of like a machine that is never ending. So that's sort of where it's at in terms of fiction and non-fiction.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, non-fiction is gaining popularity, although personal view, of course, it is kind of boring. But
Okay.
at the same time, yeah, it makes a lot of sense because I think non-readers get into reading because of non-fiction these
Yes,
days.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So there's a lot of scope for that. Fiction, you'll have to work harder, but you can definitely, like, I would say, like, try screenwriting also. A lot
right.
of demand for that. Yeah.
So Alap has one more question. How is the funding scenario in the publishing industry? Is it similar to other industries? Like, is it growing exponentially?
Um, it's a tough question. So there are some interesting companies, for example, like a traditional. So there's it's different, right? Like there's a traditional publishers like a Penguin or HarperCollins, etc. They are sort of legacy businesses, and they're sort of going along. But there are companies like Wattpad, for example, Storytel, Audible, right?
Yeah.
Those are interesting. And yeah, so for example, Wattpad, we interviewed the founder of Wattpad for one of our podcasts, not founder, the India head of Wattpad for one of our podcasts. That is very interesting because it's sort of like a crowd-funded publishing platform, where writers write their books on it, and the books that have the most ratings and that are most popular, it's an algorithm based thing
Mhm.
rather than a traditional publishing house where editors deciding what's good and what's bad and getting published. And there's a lot of writers on these platforms, so things like, and then what happens is something that's really good then gets farmed off for screen. um, you know so a lot of content is getting adapted, so that is
Yeah.
very interesting, like Pratilipi also, um, which took Westland's team and put it into its own self.
Mhm.
So if you're sort of a disruptor in the publishing industry, like a Wattpad, like audiobooks, so audiobooks are increasing exponentially. More and more people are reading audiobooks, are listening to audiobooks. Even non-readers are listening to audiobooks. Most publishers now, they are trying to convert all of their books into audiobooks. We have long commute, etc. It's easy to listen to a book, right? So if you're a disruptor, then I am like, I am seeing money coming to those things, but traditional publishing, not so much. Yeah.
Okay.
Book publishing, not so much. Yeah.
Right. Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And these days, I think I've seen that webtoons are also getting adapted into like shows and all of that. So that's
Yeah.
quite interesting to see.
Yeah.
So, for this is for the audience. Like, if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A part, and we'll take it out. So, yeah, getting back, what is the one behind the scenes fact that you would like to share with us about your podcast, Books and Beyond?
Okay, so yeah, the podcast, there are a lot of glitches. So, with any recording, there's a lot of glitches. So the final product that you guys see is very different. Sometimes we have to do 2 3 takes, because what happened in the pandemic was we had to start recording it remotely. We were recording in studio before then. We sometimes do still hire a studio, for our other podcasts if needed. Um, but things like internet connection, things like sort of like, when you get a guest, you can't control their connection. uh, in the middle of a podcast, somebody's internet has just dropped and we've lost the whole file, and then we have to sort of re-record it again. So there's a lot of like glitches that go on. Your mic is not working. mm, you are in a new location and there's a lot of echo, so your sound, you record a podcast and then you give it to your sound engineer and they say this is not usable. So luckily we've had amazing guests
Mhm.
who have also said that yes, we'll record again because the sound quality is bad. So there's a lot of behind the scenes, lots of stuff goes on, and then people only see the final thing, and that's with any product.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, like when you hear a podcast or something, it a lot of people have the impression that it's kind of a low effort thing, but
Hmm.
it's definitely, I think, the opposite. Because,
Yeah.
like you said, matlab, you can never tell how many times it has been recorded, right? For all I know, you could have that would be your 10th effort at recording it.
So that's something also like I want to talk about, like podcasts and books both, because what is the difference between a best-selling thing? See, anyone can write, right? Anyone, like I can start writing a story or whatever, right? There's so many. What is the difference between a best-selling book or a best-selling podcast, and something that is sort of like put out there and forgotten? So that's sort of like where Bound is also operating, where we are in the business of making hits, sort of, working with writers, working with creators, and giving it, sort of like making sure that the production is at a certain level, because that is the only way to different. It's a creator economy, everyone is writing, etc. That's the only way to differentiate yourself with the quality of the idea, sort of. It's not just like on a whim, let's sort of like, you can do it, it might
Yeah,
work, but the quality of the idea, the amount of research, the depth, the production value, how are you as a host, how many, if you're writing a book, how much have you edited, how much have you thought about it, etc. So I really do think that, that amount of effort makes a big difference, uh,
yeah, of course.
in making a.
Effort takes the quality to a whole new level. Like the idea could be unique or it could be
Yeah,
basic, but it's the effort which will decide
yeah.
how well it does. Right. So, a word of advice to the people who would like to start their own podcast or writing journey, but they really
Yeah.
don't know where to start.
Yeah, I would just say like start, like sort of like learn by doing it. If you don't know how to start, take a class, upskill yourself. I would say don't overthink sort of things. If you don't know something, just sort of like do step one, and if you and take a class, get some help, read some books, keep learning. Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you agree that the more you read, the more you're able to write, or the better you're able to write?
100%. 100%. For sure. If you are creating anything, the more you listen, if I'm making podcasts, if I'm listening, I'm learning from the best, right?
Yeah.
If I'm reading, I'm sort of reading critically, I'm underlining, I'm seeing what are these authors, what are these writers doing that makes this book so good, what are the skills that they've used, what are the techniques they've used, what can I learn from them? So I think if you're creating something, you have to consume critically.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes sense. So, on the entrepreneurial side of it, what's your advice to those people who want to start their own venture? Maybe in the same field, maybe in a different one.
I would say, like, obviously, start with the very tiny version of like what you're building. So don't invest, everything sort of in it. Go slowly. Talk to the customer. and make sure, because I feel like a lot of times, people have very amazing ideas, and it happens to all of us. But then, you last time, have you spoken to a person who sort of like this product is going to solve for? The answer is no. So I would say speak to at least like 50 to 100 people. What do they want? So, we spoke to a lot of writers, lot of creators, lots of, what do they want? What are their problems? What is your service? Where does your service start and end? How does it address a problem? So I think always speaking to the customer, even when you say you're starting a podcast, right? Who's your audience, right? So what we do is when we do a podcast, we make a small, very small trailer version, and we have a group of beta listeners. So we put it to those beta listeners and we get their feedback.
Okay.
We say that, would you listen, what is it, what did you like, what did you not like, different, we have a questionnaire, right? And then sort of based on the, it's sort of like it's a pilot, and based on that, then we understand, okay, people like this, they don't like, we don't put it all and make it something, and then realize, oh, there nobody sort of is interested in this. Like, you have to constantly be speaking to people and asking them. I think that is sort of what, yeah.
Yeah, so knowing your customer is basically the foundation of a new
Yeah,
venture.
like think about them, talk to them.
Yeah. So we have a couple more questions. So what is the fundamental difference between audiobooks and podcasts? Question from Anna.
Okay, that's a good question. So, audiobooks is basically like a book that has been sort of converted into like a book that you see sort of in a bookstore, like Atomic Habits, being narrated, in an audio version. So the narration is very important. Podcast is not in a book format. So podcast is episodic formats. So it's sort of like conversation starters, like the Habit Coach, which every episode, it's a 5 minute, every episode is a 5 minute podcast on sort of like a different thing you can do to increase your habit stickiness. So podcast can also be a conversation. An audiobook is just sort of like the, if it's a fiction, it's sort of a retelling. Audio shows can be similar to books. So sometimes, you'll have an audio show that feels very much, it's like a serial, a TV show without the video.
Yeah.
It'll have that kind of production value. It's a story that is cut up into episodes. So every episode, at the end of every episode, there's a cliffhanger. Um,
Yeah.
so audio shows are similar to audio books. Audio books, they're not serialized, for example. Podcasts are serialized because you're cut up into different episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So Upmanyu asks, do you think publishers have a similar narrative for fiction? So, for example, Kevin Massal's best-selling series of the Kalki, he didn't get any publisher. Same with Anand Neelkanthan, and they got huge success. So, is there a reason that publishers do not put out these authors?
Like, put out, like, these
Like their
authors.
work wasn't accepted by publishers, but they were hits when they put it out
So see,
themselves.
like, because that's the thing, because these publishing is not algorithm based. See, the people making like, that's why Wattpad, etc., they are based on like data. Now the editors at publishing houses, they have data which is their own intuition based on experience and study. So that is not always 100%. Harry Potter was also rejected 19 times.
Yeah,
So you don't, the thing with content is subjective. You may have great, and it's even like, think about it, even VC funds, right? They pass on, I'm sure the people who pass on Uber are sort of shooting themselves in the foot. It's not a perfect science, because we as human beings are not sort of perfect, so we
yeah,
cannot perfect it to that degree. There will be some hits that we miss, that we don't see. So I think that's the only reason.
yeah. Like, of course, sometimes it's just the same thing with trends. I think you never know what's gonna hit off, and
Correct.
suddenly the '90s are back. So
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
yeah. So Jamal asks, does being in Mumbai give you an advantage to run Bound?
I think now with everything being remote, it is sort of like, yeah, it's great to meet people and network. Actually, the publishing industry is very interesting. The film and OTT content screenwriting, that's in Bombay, but the publishing industry is in Delhi. Huh. So I think actually being in Bombay when I first started was a disadvantage because I was working primarily in the publishing industry. So but I think the pandemic has changed everything.
Yeah.
I think that sort of you know it's just opened up everything. We are online right now, right?
Yeah.
Like so I think that was a big game changer.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you'd have to probably, if we had an offline event, we'd ask you, please fly down to Ahmedabad and speak with
Yeah.
us. But right now it's possible because
Yeah.
I'm not in Ahmedabad, you're not in Ahmedabad, and yet we're
Yeah.
talking.
Correct. Exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome. So let's have a quick rapid fire, tiny questions. So what's your favorite genre of books?
I don't have a favorite genre. I actually read it. Like I love reading across genres.
Okay. So this will be very tough, but your top three favorite books of all
That is
time.
a so hard question. I can't think. I was trying to think of an answer before this session, and I just couldn't think of something. And I think I'd go back to like what I always go back to, which is books from my childhood. So, for example, like Harry Potter, obviously. I love Anne of the Green Gables, the series. I love Enid Blyton's Famous Five. I think like the books that you read in your childhood, they stay with you in a way that no other books can stay with you. They form
Absolutely.
you, and they are so even Heidi, so memorable. I've loved so many books in my adulthood, but
Yeah.
I remember the feeling and the rush I got, when I was a kid reading those books, being exposed to those new worlds. That's never come back.
Yeah, like that really stays with you. Like even today, if I'm talking to a friend regarding, books, ultimately I'm going to talk about our childhood favorites, and there's nothing quite like it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, what is your preferred format? Paperbacks, hardcovers, or Kindle?
I think hardcovers.
So, do you even collect hardcovers?
I
Like,
don't collect. I like the feeling of a hardcover. Paperback is wet. I cannot read on Kindle. I have a Kindle. I have tried reading on it. I have many books on Kindle. But I just feel I can't get into the book the same way.
yeah, makes sense. You need to be there
Oh,
with the book.
inside. Yeah, exactly.
So, what would be the title of your autobiography?
I can't think of anything. Title of my autobiography. Like maybe like mad about content, mad about stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, three words which sum up Tara.
Oh, very hard to describe yourself in 3 words. I think
Definitely. You can take five if you want.
no, even five. I don't know. I don't ever like. Very hard to describe yourself, but okay. Creativity, curiosity, and and maybe two is enough.
Okay. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the last question as the part of the rapid fire would be, what is your one guilty pleasure?
Netflix, TV.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
what are you watching these days?
What am I watching? Oh yeah, I'm watching. Have you seen Jane the Virgin?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
I'm
Yeah.
watching that. That's a
Okay.
guilty pleasure.
Okay. So, again, for the audience, if you guys have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. The session will end soon, so we'll take those up. And yeah, from me, I just want to know what is next for Bound.
Okay, yeah, good question. So we are actually sort of in the middle of a rebranding effort, which we're gonna sort of launch our new website. Our website is a little old, so we're gonna launch that in August. We have many more amazing podcasts coming out. So we're going to be launching them starting June end. So please look out for that, because we're working with some fantastic creators and launching those, and then also building on our ever amazing community, on our social media platforms, and continuing with our services.
Right, that sounds awesome. And I'll definitely tune into the podcast, and I recommend the audience to tune in as well. So I've followed Bound for a while, and I think I came across Bound because you guys were posting those opportunities in the creative industry. So I always look out for those,
Yeah,
and I think you guys are doing some amazing work with the page. Like, there's always great content over there.
thank
So,
you, thank you.
yeah, seeing, let's see,
There's
yeah,
another question, I think. How do
yeah,
you monetize a podcast?
yeah.
Yeah, good question. Great question. It's difficult to monetize a podcast. It's still new. Uh, so we right now for our originals, we try and get some sponsorship. So the way that you monetize it is through that. Brands who want to sort of reach out. Podcast ads, there's a Nielsen report that's come out that talks about podcast advertising, and some of the numbers are amazing, because listening to a podcast means that person is so intimate with you, rather than like watching a reel which is just 3 to 4 seconds and you forget about it. A retention rate on a podcast is quite high. So if there is an ad, or if there is something sponsored put in, there's a higher chance of conversion than in any other platform, but it's still very difficult to monetize. So what we are doing is we produce podcasts for other people, because it's also a great branding tool. So if a company has a podcast and manages to get sort of a mass of listeners, then they can use that podcast to engage with with their customer base, build some trust, and sort of also initiate them a little bit to their products, or to sort of um, what their brand is, for example, if it's employer branding. So that is sort of how you do it, and hopefully the advertising, brands will warm up even further to them.
Right, right. Makes sense. Uh, yeah. So Alav has one more question. Not a big fan of podcasts, but recently started listening to Mission ISRO by Harsha Bhogle. So other than the story, Harsha Bhogle puts another dimension to it. So is it more about the content or is it about the storytelling?
Everything, there's so many different elements that go into making a good piece, right? Like it's for the host, are you sort of the is the host able to tell the story well? Are they able to engage the listener, right? You can have the and you and it's also, uh, an amazing story, good content, both of those together, good production. If either one of those are not there, if it's an amazing story and the host is amazing, but you can't hear anything, you're not going to listen, right? If it's an
Yeah,
amazing story, the host is just droning on and on, you're not going to listen. If the host is fabulous, but he's just talking something that's super boring, you're not going to listen. So everything comes into the play when making content, whether it's a book or whether it's a podcast or whatever else you're doing.
yeah, it's a whole package. Like you can't compromise on anything.
Yeah.
Everything's Yeah. So my question, actually, I'm really curious about this. So, how do advertise your podcast? Like, for example,
Mhm.
today, how do I
Yeah.
get the word about it out there?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. What we have found is that, uh, like social media only goes sort of like a certain way. So what we did is we tried to get the podcast featured on Apple. So we try and sort of like there's some forms that you can fill in to get the
Yeah.
podcast featured and new and noteworthy, etc. Get sort of like a press coverage about it, get more people to listen. Um, Give sort of because you want it to be as frictionless as possible. So for example, like WhatsApp marketing, you have a database, you can send links, ask for feedback, etc. Email marketing, again, like it's a little less frictionless. Social media, uh, the stories may work, but sort of like reels and posts and things like that, and even digital marketing campaigns that we've tried don't work that much. I don't know why. It's also like these algorithms are um, different. So, uh, you know, sometimes these things also just take a life of their own. So, for example, my podcast is trending in 30 countries. Now, I don't know how it got to this. I did not advertise in Egypt. I did not advertise in Sweden, right? I know
Yeah.
it just takes a life of its own sometimes.
Yeah, podcasts do have a very different trajectory. I have seen, like, with your podcast, like it's trending in 30 countries. And I've heard of a lot more podcasts, like, you reach the people you never even thought about, never even wondered that, okay, they'll be
Yeah,
tuning in.
correct, exactly.
And like you mentioned, on social media websites, it doesn't somehow work out that well. I think it's because of the kind of attention span,
Yeah,
which I mean, a typical reel scroller would
correct.
probably not listen to an hour-long episode,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So there's one more. There are more questions. So, what is the most critical for creating content? The actual info or the way of curation?
The way of curation, I'm not sure what you mean. You mean the editorial sort of like,
I think he implies articulation of the book.
yeah, like as I said, it's everything together. I don't, if the information is great, but I read it like it's a Wikipedia entry, not good, right? Like, again, it's the same answer I would give is that, everything is important and content is king. So, one thing I would like to say is that even if you have the best production, you have amazing music, etc., and your content itself is boring, then that's bad. So all I feel like all elements are important, but content is king. The story is important, the idea is important, how unique it is. All of those things definitely add.
Yeah.
It's
I
all
hope.
experience. You're creating an experience. Like people always say, "Do you judge a book by its cover?" And then you do, right? The
Yeah.
cover is an experience. The blurb is an experience. The people who review the book is an experience. The way the book, the font is an experience. So when you're creating something, you're creating an experience holistically. So
Yeah, you need to hit all the points. Like, you
yeah,
can't have a bad cover. Nobody's going to pick up your book if they don't know your name.
yeah, or title, right? The
Yeah,
title is important.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So things like if you go into non-fiction, especially for non-fiction, title is so important.
Yeah.
Reviews are important. I mean, yeah.
And Alap asks, is Bound a data-driven company?
Yeah, definitely. So for example, we're always learning how many people listen to our podcasts, from where, which cities, how old, etc. Again, as I said, you talk to your customers, you find out, what they want, what they like, depending on sort of like the numbers, you'll create more content like that. Even on social media, what is your engagement, which posts are doing well, which posts are not doing well. If you put a class up, right? We've done so many different types of classes. Now we know which classes work, which classes don't. So you're constantly sort of like learning to use feedback.
So, despite a creative, enterprise, you guys still work on data because data is the new oil, and data
Like
is
because you,
basically.
yeah, again, like people think creativity is airy fairy. To be successful, it's the same principles. You listen to your customer, you manage, you sort of like, demystify, you put things in a process. It's the same thing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Makes sense.
yeah.
So, I think that was it for all our questions. So it was great chatting with you, Tara.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much
so
for
much.
inviting me, and thank you for all your questions. I really enjoyed answering them, and I hope you got something out of it. And if you want the book recommendations, I'm happy to give those also. I can WhatsApp you.
Definitely, I would love those, and I'm pretty certain our audience would also love to, get those books. And yeah, thanks a lot for taking out the time.
Of
It
course.
has been great chatting with you, and I hope we get to connect. more
Yes,
in the future.
yes, would love that. Okay, bye.
Bye bye.